The first snow of December brushed the East River like static, and Evan Mercer stood at the window of their Williamsburg apartment, watching ferries cut through the cold. Olivia Crane's voice carried from the kitchen, sharp, melodic, commanding, as she read off logistics to her assistant on speakerphone. "No, the uplighting has to be amber, not gold. Gold reads tacky on camera. And make sure the bar signage says impact, not innovation. We've retired that word." Her tone was the practiced mix of charm and control she used with donors, reporters, even him sometimes. Evan half listened while scrolling through raw footage on his laptop. Interviews from a small climate nonprofit. Still unfinished, still unpaid. The footage was good. A fisherman in Louisiana speaking of water that climbed his doorstep. But there was no budget left to finish it, and the silence from potential funders hummed like a dial tone. Olivia had started calling it his sabbatical, the way others called unemployment by sweeter names. That night she came home late from the office, cheeks flushed from the Manhattan wind, still buzzing with the velocity of her world. "We confirmed the townhouse," she said, kicking off her heels. "It's perfect. 3 floors, open staircase, mirrors everywhere. Even the city lights look curated." She said perfect, like it was a strategy, not an accident. The event was supposed to be both her birthday and a fundraiser for the new philanthropy tech venture she'd joined. A sleek hybrid of conscience and capitalism that made her glow in every camera angle. Evan helped where he could, editing a short video montage, proofreading the donor profiles, arranging playlists that wouldn't distract. But the more he helped, the less he felt part of it. Each spreadsheet, each RSVP update, each floral decision felt like choreography for something he'd only been cast in as background. On the night of the planning meeting, he watched her work from their couch, multiple tabs open, a color-coded schedule of who would speak, who would laugh, when champagne would be refilled. Even the anecdotes were scripted, stories from her career, trimmed for relatability, spiked with self-deprecation. She practiced one aloud. "Evan still thinks impact can't be measured in metrics, which is adorable, right?" She laughed softly, testing the rhythm. Then she noticed his eyes on her and froze. "It's just an example," she said quickly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. He smiled faintly. "Of course." But something inside him recoiled, not from the joke, but from how easily it had been rehearsed. He looked around their apartment, the half-wilted flowers from her last press dinner, the donation forms stacked near the window, the framed photo of them in Montauk where she'd once said she felt off-grid, almost honest. It struck him that every part of their life lately had an audience, even when no one was watching. When he reached to take her laptop from her lap, suggesting a break, she shook her head gently. "This isn't just a party, Evan. It's optics. It's how people decide what kind of woman I am, how much I'm worth." Her words lingered long after she fell asleep. He lay awake, tracing the glow of the streetlight across their ceiling, realizing how success could make intimacy ornamental. In her world, transparency was a brand, not a truth. The next morning, she kissed his cheek, already late, already radiant in her tailored coat. "Wish me luck," she said. "Always," he replied. But as the door shut, he felt the distance in that word, the way it now meant permission more than affection. He opened his laptop, watched his unfinished film flicker to life, and heard her voice still echoing, "It's not just a party, it's optics." And for the first time, he saw the story of his life with her like footage waiting to be cut. Perfectly lit, immaculately framed, and nowhere near honest. The first sign came small, almost domestic. A folded invoice half sticking from Olivia's tote bag as she left it on the kitchen chair. Evan saw it while clearing the table. A dinner charge at the Whitmore Hotel, 2 entrees, a bottle of Pinot Noir, dated a week she'd claimed to be traveling for a strategic offsite. He tucked it back where he found it, telling himself not to read narratives into receipts. But stories were his job. And once he started noticing, the details refused to stay still. Her schedule, once predictable, had grown erratic. 10 p.m. Zoom calls she took from the balcony, coded calendar invites labeled Impact Synergy, Slack pings that made her laugh in a register he hadn't heard in months. When he'd asked casually who M was, the one who kept tagging her in late-night comments on LinkedIn, she'd smiled too quickly. The kind of smile that hides rather than softens. Miles Davenport, she said, as though the name itself granted immunity. He's one of our partner donors. Brilliant guy, bit eccentric. We're building something real. Evan knew the type. White shoe consultant turned philanthropist. A man who said disruption, like prayer, and ethics, like decor. He'd met dozens through Olivia's work, but this name lodged differently. The next week, her perfume changed, less floral, more metallic, and her laughter when checking messages had a flicker of giddiness that used to belong to them. One night, unable to sleep, he sat at her desk while she showered. Her laptop, left open, pulsed with unread notifications. He didn't pry, not at first. He just stared at the contact list, the way Miles D. sat neatly between Mom and Monica, PR. The thread previewed a single line. Need to debrief. Call me after he sleeps. The words hit like cold water. He, not Evan. He closed the laptop before the guilt could fully bloom. But the echo stayed, expanding in the room, making even the silence feel deceitful. The next morning she was bright, rehearsing lines for an upcoming investor pitch while tying her hair into a low knot. "You okay?" she asked, catching his stare. "Just thinking," he said. "About what?" "About how easy it is to edit out what doesn't fit." She frowned, half distracted. "You mean in film?" He didn't answer, and she didn't ask again. Days blurred into winter's dull rhythm, her out the door before sunrise, him sifting through hours of footage he couldn't finish. His shame at suspecting, at doubting, at caring this much, mutated slowly into something harder, cleaner. Clarity. It wasn't about Miles, not really. It was about the joke at the party, the way she'd framed him as quaint, unmeasured, adorably impractical. That joke had been her confession disguised as comedy. She'd already begun leaving him that night, rewriting their intimacy into anecdote. Now he began to see the pattern. How every smile she gave him in public was a performance for someone else's camera. How every kindness came paired with distance. Their life had become a script she was editing in real time, cutting his role scene by scene. He started keeping small notes, timestamps, screenshots, fragments of dialogue, not to expose her, but to make sense of the erosion. It was the documentarian in him, desperate to preserve the moment truth began to rot. One night, after she left for another strategy dinner, he stood in their living room, the city lights bleeding through the window, and whispered to the empty room, "You crossed the line before I even saw it." The words came out calm, almost tender. There was no rage left, only a strange relief in naming what had already happened. By the time Olivia returned past midnight, smelling faintly of Miles's cologne, the one she once said she hated. Evan was sitting at his desk, editing his unfinished film. He didn't look up when she kissed his shoulder. He simply said, "I think I finally understand the story." She smiled, misreading him completely. "Good. Maybe it's time you finish it." He nodded, eyes on the flickering frame of a man describing a flood. "Oh, I will," he said. "I think I finally know what it's about." The first time Evan printed one of Olivia's emails, he felt like a thief in his own home. The printer hummed in the half-light of early morning, spitting out quiet proof in 12-point font. Meeting requests stamped at midnight, calendar invites coded as confidential offsite, a string of forwarded attachments from Miles Davenport's private account. He read each line twice, searching not just for betrayal, but for context, something that might make this less deliberate. But what he found instead was tone, affection wrapped in professional jargon, intimacy in subtext. "I trust your instincts," she'd written. "You always know how to frame things beautifully." Frame, the word landed like a bruise. He didn't rage. He didn't confront her. He simply began collecting. A screenshot here, a receipt there. Small fragments of a truth he already knew. Not to expose her, not yet. Just to have a record, because he'd spent too long living in stories other people edited. Now, the narrative was his to document. His apartment became a quiet evidence lab. He kept the proofs in a folder labeled budget draft, tucked behind unpaid invoices. When Olivia was home, he moved through their rooms like a polite ghost, offering wine, listening to her pitch rehearsals, nodding as she spoke about transparency and accountability. He learned to study her diction the way he once studied film dialogue, not for content, but for what it tried to conceal. One afternoon, he met Maya in a cafe in Fort Greene. She'd once been his mentor, a journalist with the unflinching calm of someone who'd spent too many nights staring at ugly truths. The cafe smelled of burnt espresso and wet wool. Outside, a gray drizzle flattened the street. "You look like you've been living in your head," she said, stirring her coffee. "I might have been," Evan replied, sliding a folded document across the table. "Tell me what you see." Maya read in silence. The timestamps, the signatures, the cross-referenced calendars. When she looked up, her expression carried both pity and warning. "You're building a case," she said. "But against whom?" He exhaled. Her. Him. The system that thinks a lie is just good strategy. I don't know. Maya leaned back, her voice low and deliberate. "Listen to me. You don't win by performing the pain. You don't post it, leak it, narrate it. You document. You protect yourself. That's it." Evan stared at the condensation sliding down his cup. "I'm not looking for revenge." "Good," she said. "Because revenge is just another version of spectacle. They'll make that the story. Not what she did, but how you reacted." Her words sank deep. He remembered the night of Olivia's party, the lights, the curated laughter, his own silence mistaken for complicity. He realized Maya was right. The moment he turned this into theater, he'd lose the moral thread. "I just want the truth somewhere safe," he said finally. "Then keep it factual. No rage in the margins. Just receipts." That night, Evan returned home to find Olivia asleep on the couch, her laptop still glowing. Her phone buzzed beside her, Miles's name flashing, then dimming. He picked it up, hesitated, then let it go dark again. The urge to confront, to demand, to shatter the lie, pulsed through him, but he didn't act. Instead, he watched her sleep, face soft and defenseless. The same woman who once whispered that he made the world feel honest. He realized then how love corrodes quietly, not with betrayal's explosion, but with its paperwork. When he turned off the lights, he whispered to the dark, not to her, "I'm not angry anymore." And in the silence that followed, he wasn't sure if that was a truth or a warning. The next morning, he labeled a new folder on his drive. Archive, Integrity. Inside, he saved everything. No commentary, no captions, just proof. Because he finally understood that in a world obsessed with performance, silence could be the most unflinching evidence of all. He waited until she was home, until the last video call ended and the glow of her ring light dimmed. The apartment smelled faintly of candle wax and exhaustion. Olivia removed her earrings one by one, stacking them neatly on the counter, as if symmetry could restore control. Evan watched her from the doorway, a folder in his hands, the sound of the city filtering in through the window, sirens, wind, some distant music that made everything feel too alive for what was about to happen. "We need to talk," he said. She froze for a second, then composed herself. "That's never good." He placed the folder on the table. It landed with the soft finality of truth. "I'm not here to perform this. Just to ask you to stop lying to me." Her eyes darted to the folder, then to him. "What's in there?" "Receipts, calendars, emails, the things you forgot to edit." A beat of silence stretched between them, long enough for the air to shift. She laughed once, brittle and short. "Jesus, Evan, you went through my files?" "You left them in plain sight," he said evenly, "like you wanted someone to find them." Olivia crossed her arms, her voice sharpening. "You don't understand how my world works. Everything is about optics, relationships, alliances, even dinners. There's always positioning. Miles, he's not. This isn't." He cut her off gently. "It is. And it's fine if you couldn't name it until now. But don't tell me it's strategy." Her gaze hardened, pride flaring like defense. "You think this is easy for me? I've had to fight for every inch. Every room I enter. I'm the only woman with authority. The only one they expect to smile while negotiating 6 figures. If I don't play the game, someone else will. So yes, maybe I blurred a line. Maybe it's complicated optics. But at least I'm trying to build something." Evan stepped closer, his voice low, steady. "You're not building. You're branding. And you used us, our life, as your proof of balance, the stable boyfriend, the creative heart. You needed that contrast to make yourself palatable." Her mouth trembled but didn't break. "Don't turn this into a morality play. You sound like you're auditioning for sainthood. You're angry because you've stalled, and I haven't." That landed somewhere deep, but not where she meant it. He let the words settle, feeling their weight, their falseness. "You think I care about your success? I loved watching you win. But you turned truth into a variable, Liv, something negotiable. And I can't live inside that equation." She looked away, toward the window where her reflection floated in the glass, half lit, half ghosted by the city lights. "You're making me the villain," she said quietly. "No," he replied. "You made yourself the story." For a moment, neither spoke. She reached for the folder, opened it, and stared at the printed proof, her own emails, each word a reflection she'd never meant to face. "You had no right," she whispered. "I had every right," he said, softer now. "Because you made me your punchline. You put me on display before I could even decide what I was in your narrative." She shut the folder, her expression hardening into the face she wore for interviews. "So what now? You going to expose me? Send this to the board? Make me pay?" He shook his head. "No. That's your world. Performance, retaliation, spin. I'm done living like everything needs an audience." The silence that followed felt heavier than shouting. She wanted him to explode, to make her feel justified in her self-defense. But he wouldn't give her that script. He'd learned that dignity wasn't a spectacle. It was the refusal to compete in someone else's theater. Finally, she asked, "Is this it?" Evan took one last look at her, the reflection of ambition without light, beauty without warmth, and said, "This is the moment you could still choose honesty. But I think you already decided." He left the folder on the table, untouched between them. As he walked toward the door, Olivia called after him, her voice shaking, "You'll regret this." He turned, meeting her eyes. "No," he said, "I'll remember it." Then he stepped out into the night, the hallway lights buzzing dimly, the air cold and clean. Behind him, their apartment glowed like a stage after the curtain falls, empty, overlit, and waiting for someone to turn the lights off. The week of the gala arrived with the tension of a city holding its breath. Manhattan was thawing out of winter, but everything still looked brittle. Sidewalk puddles reflecting glass towers, billboards advertising virtue as luxury. Olivia was everywhere, in interviews, on panels, in press photos beside Miles Davenport, the visionary duo reshaping social good. Her smile in those pictures was immaculate, as if airbrushed from the inside out. Evan couldn't decide if she looked triumphant or terrified. Maybe both. He spent that week mostly in silence, splitting his time between editing work he could barely focus on and finalizing the quiet dossier he'd assembled. Timestamps, correspondence, expense trails, event budgets that blurred professional and personal boundaries. It wasn't vengeance. It was documentation. The kind people in Olivia's world called risk mitigation. He'd written a cover note to the compliance division of her firm, anonymous but meticulous. Facts only. No accusations. No adjectives. Just the story as it existed, in her own handwriting. He mailed it one cold morning, the envelope sliding into the blue postal box with a sound softer than closure. There was no thrill, no satisfaction. Just a muted steadiness, the way a storm ends when you've already accepted the wreckage. That night, he sat at his desk and wrote a letter. Not for lawyers, not for exposure, but for her. It took hours. He began, erased, began again. The words came slow, stripped of bitterness, almost tender in their restraint. Olivia, you once told me that truth is about timing, that transparency only works when the lighting is flattering. I believed that for a while, but now I know truth doesn't wait for permission. I'm not angry, not anymore. But I won't carry your secrecy for you. Love can't survive when one of us is the stage and the other is the story. I'm returning the key you gave me the first week we moved in. You said it meant access, trust, belonging. For me, it became evidence of how long I stayed after the door had already closed. You'll find no revenge here, only refusal. I refuse humiliation as a love language. I refuse to be rewritten to make someone else's ambition look clean. Take care of yourself, Liv. I mean that. Just remember, silence isn't forgiveness. It's boundary. Evan. He folded the letter carefully, slipped the key inside the envelope, and sealed it. The small click of the metal against paper sounded like punctuation, the end of a paragraph he'd been too afraid to finish. The following evening, he watched her gala unfold through the live stream on his laptop. The event was perfect, of course, an orchestra of curated empathy. The stage lights bathed everything in soft gold. Miles stood at the podium, his voice smooth as velvet. Olivia shimmered beside him in a backless gown the color of champagne, her posture flawless, her laughter timed to the rhythm of applause. For a moment, Evan almost admired her, how completely she had become the image she'd built. But then the camera panned closer, catching something human in her expression, a flicker of distraction, a strain beneath the gloss. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she could feel the machinery starting to shift under her. Evan closed the stream halfway through her speech. He didn't need to hear her thank the team who believed in integrity and innovation. He'd seen the lighting, the script, the illusion. Outside, the city breathed in and out, cars threading through the wet streets like constellations on the move. He stepped onto his fire escape, the cold air cutting through his sleeves, and watched the skyline pulse with its indifferent beauty. Somewhere behind one of those glowing windows, she was still performing. He whispered her name once, not as a plea, not as regret, but as a release. Then he went inside, packed a single bag, and placed the envelope on the counter by the vase of fading roses. By morning, she would find it, the letter, the key, and the silence between them. A clean ending, written in a language she'd never learned. Dignity without spectacle. By the following week, the sheen began to dull. What had been a glittering fundraiser turned into a case file. Internal emails leaked, not publicly, but just far enough to reach compliance, the board, the right kind of whispers. Procedural review, they called it, as if the words could hide the smell of damage. The gala photographs, once radiant across Olivia's LinkedIn and the fund's website, began to disappear one by one, replaced with vague statements about governance alignment and ethical recalibration. Evan didn't watch it unravel in real time. He heard the fallout through others. Maya forwarded a redacted memo. An ex-colleague texted, "Guess your ex's golden boy lost his halo." Miles Davenport had stepped back to focus on family, his publicist's phrase of exile. Olivia, now unnamed in every press update, had taken a personal leave. But the silence was louder than scandal. The city that once applauded her every move now regarded her absence like an unspoken warning. Inside her office, Olivia faced the inquisition she once led. Compliance interviews, calendar audits, careful questions framed as sympathy. "It's not personal," one investigator told her. "It's policy." She smiled tightly, the same way she'd smiled through 100 donor meetings, but her pulse stuttered beneath her sleeve. For the first time, she realized she was no longer the architect of her own narrative. Someone else was editing now, redlining her version of events, replacing words like vision with risk. At home, the letter from Evan sat in her drawer, folded neatly beside the returned key. She had read it twice, then a third time, the sentences turning into mirrors she couldn't look away from. "I refuse humiliation as a love language." The line replayed in her mind, whenever a new email arrived from legal, whenever she caught her reflection under office fluorescents. Without the stage lights, she looked older, stripped of her practiced glow. Evan, meanwhile, had vanished quietly. He'd sublet the apartment, canceled his streaming subscriptions, deleted her number from his phone. His name wasn't in any report, no quote, no accusation. He wasn't a whistleblower or a victim. He was just gone. He rented a small studio near Prospect Park, the kind of place where the sound of rain could drown the city's static. Days bled together in silence. Coffee, editing, long walks through the late winter light. Sometimes he thought of calling Maya to ask how Olivia was faring, but he never did. The point of leaving, he told himself, was not to orbit her fallout. He'd stepped out of her narrative for good, and that meant refusing even the satisfaction of watching it burn. In one of his new edits, a fisherman in his documentary said, "When the water takes something, you don't wait for it to give it back. You learn where not to. Stand next time." Evan looped that clip over and over, adjusting the sound levels until the sentence filled the room like a prayer. One evening, he saw Olivia's name trending faintly online, an industry newsletter noting her resignation to explore independent opportunities. The phrasing was merciful, bloodless. No one would know what it had cost her, or what it had cost him. But he didn't click the link. He closed his laptop and sat in the quiet, letting the absence settle into something steady. In another part of the city, Olivia walked out of her office for the last time. The marble lobby reflected her in shards, one image fragmented into many. No reporters waited, no colleagues lingered for a goodbye. Just the hush of a building returning to neutrality. She paused by the glass doors, touched her reflection, and almost didn't recognize herself without the lighting. The world didn't end. It just stopped applauding. And somewhere across the river, Evan felt the shift. Not as triumph, but as release. The story had collapsed exactly the way he'd feared and somehow hoped. Quietly, without spectacle, without applause. Spring arrived late that year, as if even the seasons hesitated to begin again. Evan's new apartment sat above a bakery in Crown Heights, small enough that the hum of the refrigerator blended with passing trains. The walls were bare except for a corkboard cluttered with still frames from his film, faces of teachers, nurses, and street vendors, each telling a story about doing the right thing when no one was watching. He edited by the light of a single lamp, its glow soft against the dark. The air filled with the sound of quiet persistence. He had no furniture worth keeping, no photographs of before. The apartment smelled of coffee, dust, and the faint sweetness of bread from downstairs. It was enough. His days were measured in small rituals, morning walks through the park, late nights with the footage, the discipline of simplicity. In those quiet hours, he found something purer than forgiveness, distance that didn't ache. The film, when he finally finished it, wasn't about Olivia or betrayal. It was about boundaries, the invisible lines people draw to remain whole. He titled it Ordinary Truth, and when he screened it in a small independent theater downtown, the room held maybe 30 people. There were no press releases, no hashtags, no champagne. When the credits rolled, the applause was brief but real, the kind that doesn't perform itself. Evan sat in the back, hands folded, watching names scroll on the screen, feeling both smaller and freer than he had in years. Somewhere across the city, Olivia sat in her new apartment, a high-rise rental paid from savings she hadn't planned to use. Her world had quieted too. No meetings, no panels, no calls from sponsors. The silence that used to terrify her now pressed in like static, a constant reminder of what ambition had cost. On her desk sat the letter Evan had written, unfolded, creased from too many readings. That night, she opened her laptop and began to type. The apology came out haltingly at first, a confession disguised as reflection. "You didn't deserve to be made small so I could seem large," she wrote. "You gave me honesty, and I mistook it for inertia. You were right about the lighting. I needed it too much." She read it twice, then closed the screen without saving. Some words, she realized, didn't belong to the world. Evan never heard from her again. He didn't block her. He simply stopped looking for her name. The absence became its own language. Clean, unambiguous, final. Sometimes, when he passed a billboard advertising one of her old campaigns, he'd glance up and feel nothing but a faint, exhausted gratitude that it wasn't his reflection up there anymore. One evening in May, as the city glowed in post-rain light, he sat on his fire escape with a notebook, writing lines for his next project. The sounds of laughter floated from the street below, a piano from the bakery owner's radio, the hum of a city endlessly reinventing itself. He thought about boundaries, not as walls, but as quiet coordinates of self-respect. In another part of Manhattan, Olivia scrolled through her phone, pausing on an old photo. The two of them at Montauk, sunburned and laughing, years before everything became a production. She almost smiled. The joke, she realized, had always been on her, the punchline carved into the space he left behind. He hadn't needed to humiliate her. He'd simply stepped out of frame, leaving her alone with the echo of her own performance. Back in his apartment, Evan closed his notebook, leaned back, and let the cool air move through the open window. He didn't think of her anymore, not with longing, not with anger, only with the kind of peace that comes when you finally stop rehearsing the past. The city lights blinked on one by one, ordinary and infinite. Somewhere inside that brightness was the truth he'd learned too late but carried now like a compass. That love without respect is just a stage, and silence, when chosen, is not revenge. It's recovery. It's the boundary that keeps you whole.